So I want to kind of get us started and do a welcome. My name is Trey Boynton. I have the pleasure of serving as the Director of Multi-Ethnic Student Affairs. And I want to thank you all, and that collective we thank you, to braving what is currently a frozen tundra outside. I think it is a testament to how this topic is something that is deeply personal for you to come out and actually want to hear and talk about the wonderful experiences of what it means to study and live abroad and experience difference by visiting a place that's outside of your own comfort zone. And so to that, I applaud all of us for being here for that. So I want to give this welcome on behalf of the International Center, Multi-Ethnic Student Affairs, and Trotter Multicultural Center, where we're being housed, and we're so gracious in providing the space for us today, to actually talk about what it means to study abroad and engage identity and difference and experiences across different contexts. Because I think that's what student life is about. So the 3 units are housed under student life, and one of our goals is that we believe that education happens in both formal and informal settings, and we focus on both formal and informal. We do that through our programs and initiatives and units and offices that offer curricular and co-curricular experiences, and I think nothing bridges that especially as studying abroad. That you get something out of every single moment. And I think our panel, really esteemed panel, I'm going to say that because I talked with each of them before and I got jealous as I went down the panel of hearing about their experiences, hearing about kind of what brought them here. And so I hope that you will be also similarly influenced by their greatness. And so I'm just going to totally pump you all up, and then now you just have so much to live up to. But I think that part of what they exemplify is what it means to engage in experiences that teach you something every single moment of the experience. That's something that's truly rare and truly special and very much a gift. And I think what I'm hoping that they'll articulate and that you'll take away is that everyone can experience that, and there are things to learn from all of those experiences. So please join me in thanking the panel and welcoming them and hearing their wonderful stories. Thanks.
Hi everyone, my name is Michelle Gonzalez. I'm a graduate student at the Ford School, and I'm also a graduate peer advisor at the Education Abroad office in the International Center. I'm going to be moderating the panel for today. We were excited to be here and to be working with the Trotter House and the Multi-Ethnic Student Affairs Committee. I think our goal for this year is to try to increase our outreach and to encourage all students from very diverse backgrounds to study abroad, and we are hoping that we can help in getting you all in touch with the resources necessary to do that. So we're just going to go down the line. I will start, but we ask that you guys save your questions to the end, so I think as you have some time to think about what you want to ask as you go along, and then we'll have some time for that when we're done. So, okay. So let me get started. Like I said, my name is Michelle. I am a graduate student at the Ford School. I'm getting my master's in public policy. My experience abroad is mainly in Latin America. I studied abroad in Buenos Aires in 2007. I graduated from Brenda University in 2008. And I was also a PeaceCorp volunteer in Honduras from 2009 to 2011. So I'm going to go down a list of questions. So the first question was my social identity in a foreign country. I think my social identity changed, and I think it varied from when I was a student to when I was a volunteer. I think I am of a Latina background. Both my parents are Mexican-American, I'm Mexican-American, and so I thought it was going to be a fairly interesting experience being an American Latino going to Latin America. And I think when I was in Buenos Aires, I felt like I blended in quite well. I was frequently stopped and asked for directions, which I thought was really interesting. But I think my identity changed when I became a volunteer with Peace Corps. Because I think when I walked in as a volunteer with a group of other Americans, the community kind of had an idea of what an American looked like. And so it was interesting because I'd come in and they'd ask me where I was from, and I'd say I was from the United States, and they're like, no, but where are you really from? Like, I'm curious. So they knew that I had some kind of like Latin background or origin. And it was funny because I think if anyone had dark hair or brown eyes, they assume they're like, oh, there's some Latina in you, like you're not completely American. So that was an interesting experience in of itself, to kind of like not feel like I was from the area, but also I was identified as someone that was an American. And it was just really interesting experience of being like othered. Like it was kind of like this third group when I was there, and it was a challenge, I would say. It was a challenge because my counterpart was, I guess I would say, the like typical American. When people think of what an American was in Latin America, my my partner in Peace Corps who lived in the town with me was like a typical American. Like he was when they expected someone to come into the door, he was very tall, he was very blonde. And everyone was like, oh, he's so fantastic, he's so interesting. And so I thought like that in and of itself was a challenge, because like I definitely didn't fit their expectations. But I think that because of that, I changed their idea of what it was. So I guess my identity as a Peace Corps volunteer was kind of like being that person that expanded their view of what an American was and what Americans were all about and what they look like, I guess. Let's see. So my experience applying for scholarships, when I studied abroad, I was a Gilman Scholar. So a Gilman Scholar is, if you receive a Pell Grant, you are eligible for this scholarship. And what's great about this scholarship is that it pays for the study abroad tuition, and it was even able to pay for my flight, which is fantastic. So you write an essay, you talk about why you want to study abroad, and part of the component is creating a project to promote international education. So what I did was I went back to my local high school and I gave a talk about my experience abroad, and I talked about why it was so important to study abroad in the first place. So I thought that was really great. It was really nice going back to my high school and kind of like, I gave a presentation on what I studied in Argentina and why I chose to study there, and I had a lot of pictures and it was really great. And I also talked to a group, it was an Upward Bound group, that were like for first generation students who were it was a college preparatory program. So I was able to speak to them as well and talk about my experience, not only as a student going abroad, but as a first generation college student studying abroad in Latin America. So I thought that was really cool. My experience talking about my time abroad with my parents and friends. My parents were really excited for me because they never had the opportunity to study abroad, so they thought like, this is a great opportunity, and they were really excited because they're like, we don't have to pay for it, like you got a scholarship, so that's even better. So they were super supportive. My aunts and uncles were kind of like, we don't get it, we don't understand why Michelle is going abroad, because it was just kind of like, not many of my cousins were able to go to college as well, but like a lot of them didn't choose to study abroad. And so I think a lot of my aunts and uncles were kind of like, I just don't get it. My grandmother thought it was great. So I think it was like half and half. There was some part of my family that hadn't been exposed to international education, and I think like their viewpoints on international education was like, you're just gonna like travel. But I think like another half saw the value in studying abroad and why it was so important, especially now. I think like we live in a very globalized world, and I think exposure to different cultures and to different countries is so incredibly important now, and I think they realized that, so that was great. My experience returning to campus or the U.S. after my time abroad. My experience afterward, I think like my perspective on everything kind of changed. I think when you go abroad, just seeing another life, another culture, how people live, I think kind of changes your perspective of what it's like to live in the U.S. from that point on. Coming back from Peace Corps was overwhelming. I lived in a really small town. I didn't go out into like big cities there were extended periods of time where I was in very rural areas, and so coming back to America for the first time was really overwhelming. Like the first time I went to a grocery store was a really crazy experience for me, or the first time I went into a mall. I think you can like understand that like it was just kind of like whoa. But I mean, I think it was I think I was changed for the better. I think I appreciated all of the resources we had here. It was a really crazy thing to go into a grocery store and to decide that I wanted a fruit that wasn't in season and I could still get it. Because like you can get everything in a grocery store in America and you don't think about those things. So I thought that was something that I had never thought about before that I really appreciated. Also plumbing and a constant source of water was something that I really, really was thankful for and grateful for after coming back. But yeah, so that was my experience. So our next person is Kinza.
Okay. Hey guys, my name is Kinza and I'm currently a senior in LSA studying film. So I traveled to South Africa and Morocco each during the summer. So first off, I was the first person in my family to ever travel abroad. Most of my family just travels together in a group, and it's usually back home to Pakistan, where we're from originally. So being Muslim, I get kind of lumped into this group of Middle Eastern or wherever, so it's kind of hard to be oh, I'm not Middle Eastern. And so when I went to Morocco, my social identity was basically everyone assumed that I was from there, and I got to experience it how a Moroccan woman would get to experience it. For the first time in my life, I was faced with street harassment. I realized that I got to realize a lot of the issues that Muslim women face in their own countries, which I never realized here because I don't go through that. But it was also, I guess, empowering for some of them to see me, because they saw me as, my students saw me as a role model, because they don't have access to some of the resources that I do, and they don't have, while Morocco is a very developed country, especially for women, there's still work to be done, and some of the females that I worked with, they had positive reactions to seeing an American that was also representative of who they are. While in South Africa, which has the similar history of America, where they had kind of a racist history and they had apartheid and everything, it was there, while they're progressing in their views and stuff, I think they still think that people need to be segregated, because most of the Black Africans are in very poor areas, and they feel that society itself is segregated in that way. So for them to see someone a minority just being part of mainstream society, they found it weird. I actually got asked if in the US there were separate schools for Muslims, and I'm no, everyone just goes to school together. It's not a concept that we have. So my first time traveling abroad, I decided I wanted to do a university program. So I got a lot of help applying for scholarships and stuff, because CJIS helped me, and then the second year I did the LSA International Internship program, and there was a specific scholarship for which I could apply for, which really helped. It pretty much covered most of my costs, and the countries I went to, the exchange rate really worked out in my favor. Talking to my parents and my friends. My parents, they're very conservative, and they like me being safe and at home and where they know what's going on in my life. I went to South Africa 4 days before everyone else in my group got there, and I didn't know that the hotel I was staying at did not have Wi-Fi or access to any of those resources. So I didn't call home for 2 days until after I got in there, and they were very freaked out. So when I made it home safely, they were really excited, and they were just happy that I didn't die. Returning to campus, I think, like Michelle said, your perspective on life changes a lot, and you look at different identities differently. I am so thankful just the amount of diversity that we have at this campus, and the resources available that help engage minorities of all type, and bring us together in settings such as these, because this doesn't happen in most other countries that I've been to.
So our next panelist is Brenda. She's going to talk about her time you were in Africa, yes? Yeah. In Africa.
Hi, I'm Brenda Duverce. I'm a first-year graduate student at the Ford School of Public Policy, and my international experience has been mainly in sub-Saharan Africa and a study abroad experience in North Africa. While in undergrad, I studied abroad in Morocco under the Gilman Scholarship, like Michelle. It's a scholarship for Pell Grant recipients. and my social identity varied depending on where I was. In Morocco, I, being, darker skin, I experienced racism or prejudice. Because I'm darker skinned, a lot of people assumed that I was sub-Saharan African, and I had to deal with the prejudice that was associated with sub-Saharan African women. I remembered in Morocco that I took a taxi, and I wanted the taxi cab driver to pick up my friend who was also African American, and the cab driver was just like, no. And then he just pointed at his skin, and he was like, he was just like, no. And it was obviously because we were both darker skinned, and I was just like, are you kidding me? Like, and I remembered another time I was going into like a restaurant with some friends, and the security guard there told us that the restaurant was full, and I was like, really? And he heard that I had an American accent, and he was like, oh, you guys are American? And I was like, yeah. And he was just like, oh, yeah, come in, it's fine. And those were the type of experiences that I had in Morocco. And the one thing I realized was the reason why those type of experiences existed was because not enough students of color went abroad. And a lot of people, perception of what American is not of people of color. So this is why I think this panel is very, very, very important. My next international experience was I was under the Fulbright Fellowship in Botswana, and being someone of color and being darker skinned there was actually a really positive experience for me because it was easy for me to blend in. But the backdraw to that was a lot of times when I did tell people that I am American, they were just like, really? Like, are you kidding me? And I was like, I'm like, yeah, I'm American. There are people like me in America. You see President Obama, and they're like, yeah, but, I just didn't assume that, there are a lot of darker skinned people. And I was like, yeah, there's a large number of us. And, I realized that, me being a person of color abroad was an opportunity for me to teach people about, this is, there are a lot of African Americans, there are Black Americans, people throughout the diaspora here in America, and we all come from various backgrounds and we all get along, and it's okay. Let's see, something else. Another experience that I had while in a Fulbright Fellowship, what I realized is, even in Morocco, a lot of families have cable television, and their perception of people of color is based on what they see on TV. So when I was in Morocco, I lived with a host family, and my host brother was watching Medea one day. And if Medea, that a lot of times they play on stereotypes of African Americans and to the extreme. So my host brother spoke French to me, and he was like, is this how a lot of Black people in America are? And I'm like, no. And a lot of people in Botswana, they watch television, and a lot of them had, or, not just African Americans, but other people of color who are stereotyped a lot in television. Television was a way for them to develop their way of seeing other people outside of sub-Saharan Africa. So that's why I also think it's important for students of color to go abroad, so you could show people that we're not, these stereotypical things you see on TV. Let's see, the next question. So my experience with scholarships, I studied abroad through the Fulbright Fellowship in Botswana, and I also went through the GIEU. And at my university, in undergrad, I was under the Gates Millennium Scholarship, and they also fund your entire study abroad trip. So I had a lot of spending money, which was very helpful. Let's see. My experience talking about my time abroad with my parents. So my parents came here from Haiti. No one in my family really went to college, so I'm a first-generation college student. But them, when I told them I was going to Morocco, initially they were a bit frightened by the thought of me leaving for that long. But they realized, this is why they came to this country. They wanted to provide opportunities like this for me to have these type of experiences that they never had. So they were like really excited about me going abroad, and they thought it was really cool. And when I would come back, they were really excited to hear my stories and see my pictures and just hear about all the cool things that I did. And I just would never forget the day that my mom, she was just like, oh, you actually wash clothes with your hands, this is what we did in Haiti. You understand what other people in other parts of the world actually go through. And it was kind of cool just hearing that from her and, her appreciating my experience. So your experience returning to campus or to the U.S. after your time abroad, I guess I had similar experience to Michelle since I spent 9 months abroad. I was initially, kind of surprised by coming back to huge supermarket, eating ice cream and pizza and stuff like that. But I guess I'll take on a different aspect of it. Just now when I have my study abroad experience on my resume, I realize a lot of recruiters, so employers, as well as graduate school, admissions directors are really interested in that. And that's one of the things I really play up on, because a lot of people like to hear your international experience, and I think it made me a really competitive applicant for a lot of different things. So that's why I would definitely push going abroad. And if anyone has any questions or needs any guidance, feel free to come and speak to any one of us.
Thank you, Brenda. Katie is a Peace Corps recruiter on campus, and she's going to talk about her time both studying abroad and with Peace Corps.
Hi everyone, like Michelle said, my name's Katie. I'm a second-year MPP like Michelle, so a lot of us are at the Ford School. And I did my undergraduate at Eastern Michigan University. So just touching on social identity a little bit, I didn't have much change in social identity, I think, until I started Peace Corps, and it wasn't necessarily a huge change, but so my dad is Irish American, he's super proud of that, and that's the identity I had growing up, because that's definitely what he wanted. And my mom is Syrian American, and I ate a lot of Syrian food as a kid, and I liked that, but it wasn't really something I really embraced until I got to Ukraine, when I just saw, it's a really great place, and I loved being there in the Peace Corps, but they have definitely some different attitudes about race, some different stereotypes that we even see here with Muslim Americans, or just being Muslim, or being from the Middle East, or anywhere from there. And so I kind of embraced it just so that I could teach people about it, and it was, I don't really look Middle Eastern, and so going to my students, going to my teachers, and being like, oh yeah, my mom's Syrian, and then being like, wait, what? And just trying to get them to think about what it is to be an American. We're all diverse in a lot of different ways, and so I kind of embraced that social identity a little bit more during Peace Corps, just to show people, especially to show people what Americans are actually like and the different backgrounds that we had. And then in terms of touching on being a minority in a study abroad or fellowship type program, so I'm a first-generation college student. None of my parents, cousins, or anything went to school until my oldest sister graduated from college. We're definitely from a low-income background, and going into something like Peace Corps or going abroad, if you're from a low-income, low socioeconomic status, you don't find many people. And so I think that is something that you kind of deal with when, and especially being somewhere like U of M even too. You're definitely a minority in that sense, and I think it's always a shocker for people to hear more about your background or more about your parents and what they're like and what your childhood was like. And so not even just interacting with locals there, but interacting with other Americans while you're abroad, and just giving them a new perspective on what it really is like to be from a different place, come from a different background. Again, it's always one of those shocker things, oh wait, what? You had a Pell Grant? I didn't even know what that was. And being able to explain to other Americans what the different diverse backgrounds we can all have, because someone might look at me and they don't think I'm diverse in any way, and being able to kind of give that perspective of how your backgrounds can be different. So in terms of applying for scholarships, so I did my undergrad at Eastern, and I studied international affairs. Prior to that, I'd been an accounting major, because I'm man, I'm sick of being broke. I think this degree will give me a lot of money. Went into my sophomore year as an undergrad being I hate this. So I looked through the course listings and was well, okay, what interests me? I had studied German a little bit in high school, so I wanted to keep up with that. And then this international affairs major just randomly appeared, and it had everything I liked. It had econ, it had some political science in it, it had language requirements. And I was okay, so when I tell my family that I'm an international affairs major, they're definitely going to think this is some sort of fluff degree. They're going to wonder what I'm actually going to do with it. And that's when I really started going online and looking at like different scholarships, like could I study abroad, like could I afford to do that, what do you even do with an international affairs degree? And that's, I mean, honestly, I hadn't even heard of what the Foreign Service was until I started searching around on the internet. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is the career for me. You get to move every 2 years, you get to learn foreign languages, you get to learn about different cultures. And so I really decided to like own the international affairs major and try to find everything I possibly could to like give that more credibility, mostly to my parents who were like, what is that? And so I found out about a couple different scholarship opportunities, and then one that stuck out a lot was this Pickering Fellowship. And so there's an undergraduate Pickering Fellowship and there's a graduate one, and there's more information I think on this handout about deadlines to apply and everything like that. But basically, if you're super geared up for doing a graduate degree and you also know that you definitely want to do the Foreign Service, the Pickering Fellowship, and there's also a Wrangel Fellowship, it's essentially the same thing, a couple differences, but they're looking for Americans of diverse backgrounds, and diversity can mean 1,000,001 things, but they want to make the Foreign Service look more like America actually looks like, and not like a Yale campus of like the 50s, or basically that the Foreign Service is not just all white men, I think is maybe less PC way of saying that. So yeah, I learned about this fellowship and I was like, wow, like I know I want to do Foreign Service, and like this is a way that I can pay for graduate school. But I also was interested in doing some service work. So I had the opportunity to go to El Salvador for like this 2-week research course at Eastern. And we got to do some volunteer work and I loved it. And I wanted to do something that wasn't just me going in for 2 weeks or a month or 6 months and like leaving. I wanted to do something that was super long term, where I could see a project from start to finish, where I could learn a new language, maybe meet people and like actually develop those like intimate relationships that you get like when you're living in a country or in a community, usually as the only American. So I applied to Peace Corps, kind of touching a bit on what my parents thought. They're like, what? Like, why do you want to do that? Like, don't you want to get a job? Like, what about grad school? And I'm like, you didn't even go to college. How are you lecturing me about grad school now? I want to do Peace Corps. So I applied to Peace Corps. Ukraine, they kind of were like, hey, we'll send you to Eastern Europe. And I was like, I didn't even know that was an option. But it was just a really great experience, and I know Michelle can talk about that as well, and we're happy to answer questions about like what Peace Corps is really like what you kind of can get out of that. But I always had that kind of Foreign Service thing in the back of my mind, and I think Peace Corps was a great way to really see, like, do I actually want to live abroad for long periods of time? Like, do I actually want to represent America overseas? Will I miss eating, like, cheese pizza enough to not want to do it? And on some days, that almost seems true. So I came back, well, actually, I guess while I was still kind of wrapping up my Peace Corps service, so it's 2 years, I knew I wanted to do grad school, looked into the Pickering thing even more, and I applied to grad school in Pickering at the same time. And was successful. Like, I was pretty shocked about that. And so, yeah, just a couple more details about the Pickering Fellowship in case you guys didn't know. So you apply, and you can apply as an undergrad, and they'll pay for your last year of college and your first year of grad school. And then usually the partner schools that you'll go to, they'll usually pay for that third year, or I guess, yeah, so your second year of grad school. And then they kind of have an allotment of money. So let's say you go to, I had in-state tuition here at Michigan, and so I had extra money left over, so they pay my rent, which is really nice, so I don't have to go in debt as a grad student. If you're a graduate Pickering Fellow, that just means they'll pay for both of your years of graduate school. And you get guaranteed internships, and so you get to intern the summer in between grad school and then when you graduate, and then you're guaranteed a job in the Foreign Service. And so it's a 5-year work commitment. So again, it's someone who like knows at least for 5 years that they want to go overseas and work in the Foreign Service. And so yeah, it was a great way for me to go to grad school. I definitely wouldn't have been able to afford it otherwise, and I get to do like the career that I wanted to do. And then experience returning back, I mean, like everyone said, it's crazy when you've been overseas for a couple years, especially in a Peace Corps type country where you're usually kind of off the beaten path. You walk into a grocery store or you want toothpaste and you're like, why are there 50 brands of toothpaste? Like, it's overwhelming, all the choices we have here. You're like, why are the parking lots so big? Like, why is this person complaining about their food? Like, it's a really interesting experience, but I think it's one that you could bring back to your friends and family who maybe haven't had that abroad experience and kind of put things into perspective. And I also think like you meet other people who've had international experiences, and it's so easy to connect with them, and it's great for networking. I mean, in terms of the Pickering program and the graduate one specifically, I think Peace Corps made me a really standout candidate for that, because like I was really able to articulate like why I wanted to go overseas as a career, why I was interested in public service, and I think that was really beneficial. Yeah, any questions you have about Peace Corps later, Pickering, anything?
So our next panelist is Michelle Jones. She's the diplomat in residence here at U of M.
Hi, everybody. Yes, bookended by Michelle's here at the end. Yeah, I'm the diplomat in residence here, which is a fancy title for talent scout. I'm a Foreign Service officer myself. I've been in the Foreign Service for 15 years. And yeah, Katie used the phrase, we want a foreign service that looks like America, which is something that Hillary Clinton said when she first became Secretary of State. And that's one of the reasons that I'm here in Michigan, and one of the reasons that we have recruiters in places, not only, you know, the Harvards and Yales of the world, but also in Oklahoma, in Florida, Arizona, you know, covering different parts of the U.S. and also recruiting not only in the big schools like U of M's and MSU and NYU's of the world, but also at community colleges, going into an increasing number of high schools, diversity organizations. I'm going to career fair in March that is directed at LGBT organizations, young professionals. So we look not only for diversity in kind of the traditional race, religion, ethnicity, but also in terms of socioeconomic status, geographical diversity, background. All those things are important because, you know, again, as Katie said, we don't want a foreign service that's made up of cookie cutter people. We all bring different skills and different aspirations and hopes and dreams to being a diplomat serving on countries abroad. Just, I guess, a little bit about me and my experience abroad, and then I can talk a little bit about what it's like to be a diplomat, particularly a female diplomat of unconventional background in the Foreign Service. I took the Foreign Service officer test, which, brief commercial announcement, is coming up in February, if anybody is interested. I took that when I was serving overseas on a Fulbright fellowship, a teaching fellowship, because in my previous life I was a college professor teaching not political science or international relations, but English, and wrote a thesis on feminist comedy in the 20th century novel. And people look at me and go, what does that have to do with international affairs? And so I say things about brain training and, you know, learning to assimilate a lot of information and good research skills. So people tend to worry about going into the Foreign Service if they don't have a particular background. We take all comers to take the test, and that's one of the things I like the best about my job, is that it's very difficult to get into the Foreign Service, but it's, I think, probably the most democratic process I've ever seen. It's all about how you perform on the test. And before I became a diplomat myself, my impression was diplomats were people whose fathers played golf with the president, or, you know, were very highly placed somehow, or went to Harvard or Yale. They weren't people like me who grew up in a small town in Michigan, first generation college student who went to community college. That could not possibly be an American diplomat, and yet there are more and more of us serving our countries. So I took the Foreign Service officer test because I love the life, living overseas and teaching. Was very surprised when I passed, and I've served in, let's see, I'm going on my 6th assignment. My most recent one was Afghanistan, where I was for up until 2013, yes. And I've been at U of M for, I'm going on my 2nd year. This is my first time living in the US in 15 years. So that's been a very, very interesting experience. Just a couple of things I wanted to say about diversity in the Foreign Service, because people have mentioned things that happened to them serving overseas. It's been really interesting being a female diplomat in countries where, you know, women don't tend to hold those kinds of positions. So I've gone into meetings where I've been the only woman in the room and been asked to take notes or serve the tea. That's pretty typical. But there's a great upside to being a female diplomat in places like Afghanistan. I was able to, you know, it gave me an entree into talking to women and children in a way that my male counterparts did not have. Women trusted me, they were able to talk to me, especially the students, about what they wanted to do with their lives. there wasn't that same level of instant bonding with the male officers. So it has its pluses and minuses, I suppose. You're kind of this odd third gender when you're a female diplomat. It's also interesting being a parent, particularly a single parent when you're serving overseas, and the way that you're regarded in different countries. Because I've served in places as diverse as Canada, Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Poland, all of them have very specific ideas about the role of women and working women in particular. So that's been interesting. I've also had the experience of being a minority as a white sort of middle-class American in countries like Bangladesh or Trinidad, and it's been very revealing to me. Given me some interesting kinds of insights. I've also had, traditionally minority friends. I have an African-American friend who served with me in Afghanistan and told me some of the stories. Like, you remember the one President Obama said about people, every once in a while he'll be at a public gathering and somebody will hand him their keys, assuming he's the valet. My friend, the African-American diplomat, has had much the same experience with going to a reception and people handing him their coats to check them, or going into a hotel when people assuming that he's the one to carry the suitcases. And obviously that's not a good way to promote going into the Foreign Service in one way. In another way, I think it's very important to break down these stereotypes, which is what all the panelists have said, and tackle these assumptions that many people overseas, but also Americans, make about what a diplomat looks like and how they behave and the kind of background that they're from. Just a few things about opportunities in the Foreign Service and in the U.S. Department of State, because people from my background did not hear about these. This is not something you hear about in a small town in Michigan or at a community college. So, part of my role is to talk these up. There's Pickering, there's Wrangell, which Katie has covered, Boren fellowships for language study, virtual student foreign service internships, the normal unpaid internships that we have, spring, summer, and fall, either in Washington, D.C. or our overseas posts as well. Many, many different opportunities, and I will be happy to give a presentation on these because that's your tax dollar at work. That's what I'm here for. But I would say if you have the chance to travel overseas, even if you make financial sacrifices, even if your parents, my parents, couldn't figure out why I wanted to do this, or why I gave up, a perfectly good, secure, tenured job as a college professor to go off into these odd corners of the globe. Even if they don't understand, they'll get it after a while, and it's been the Fulbright was a life-changing experience, and working for the Foreign Service has been very challenging and very, very fulfilling. So you can tell I'm enthusiastic about it. I'm really happy to talk to you individually. If I'm in the Ford School, 3rd floor, come by and see me.
Great. So does anyone have any questions?
So you all sort of talked about how you are in this unique position to sort of tackle these stereotypes that people place on you, or the racism that you experience. That must be really exhausting. And what tools did you use to sort of help you get through the really challenging points where you're like, oh, I don't know if I can answer another question about how the heck can I possibly be American? What tools did you use to help get out of those sort of exhaustion? So this is sort of posed to all of you, or any of you who have anything to say about it.
So I'll go. The PeaceCorp is great. They had a volunteer-led group that worked on issues of diversity. We'd have, I think, meetings every few months. And what was so great was to be able to have a group of people who were experiencing similar occurrences or incidents like the ones that I had gone through. So it was really nice to kind of give them a call if I could, or meet with them and kind of decompress. But I think, Peace Corps does a great job of kind of preparing you for the fact that the experience in and of itself, regardless of your background, is going to be challenging. And I think it's about, what I really did was just taking a step back and realizing, like, this is a challenge, but at the same time, I'm definitely changing someone's mind about what an American is. And I think, like, which kind of sounds like a huge overarching thing, like, but I think just meeting 2 or 3 people and kind of explaining to them about how America is very diverse and very different, I think that in and of itself is a great thing. And so yeah. Well, I think we'll stay a little bit behind, so if anyone wants to speak to any one of us or has any other questions, please feel free to come up and talk to any one of us. Thank you all for coming. I know the weather's not so great, so we really appreciate you making the trek up here, and we hope you enjoyed the panel. Thank you.